Alright guys, welcome back to another Pokemon TCG Pocket video on my channel. So the new pack is going to drop in a couple of hours, days, depending on when you watch this. And I went ahead and built a few decks using the new cards, right? So we already have a few cards, and obviously with the cards that we know are going to be in the pack, with already existing cards, there are some spicy combinations which actually are really good. So we're going to take a look at a few of these decks and actually see what's viable of playing and what may not be as good. So this is the first deck. So Leafeon EX and Eevee EX. Now this is an interesting deck because now we're able to actually play for Eevees in the same deck, right? So with this deck, essentially you're looking to bring forth at any given moment always an Eevee, and you're always going to be able to draw at least one of the evolutions required because you're never really going to break. Together with the new Eevee bag, this is a spicy combination because Eevee bag can heal. Eevee bag allows us to deal more damage. This basic normal Leafeon does more damage the more leaf energy it has attached to it. So this actually works or synergizes very well with the EX Leafeon, which essentially is able to attach leaf energy from the energy zone to one of our Pokemon. So this is actually a pretty spicy combo with which we should be able to essentially do quite a bit of damage. Now, the good thing here is it's very consistent. The bad thing is we're kind of lacking damage, right? So we're really not really having a hard-hitting Pokemon here. I mean, the normal Leafeon could be doing a lot of damage depending on how much energy it has attached to it, I guess, right? But the problem is try and get as much energy on this Pokemon. Now, Eevee bag is going to be helpful because we're going to be able to do 10 more damage. Plus, it is an item and not a, what's it called? And not a support card, right? So it's not going to block any other Pokemon. We're going to any other cards. So in conjunction with Giovanni, this could be actually pretty decent to do even more damage. Or you may be dropping a red in there, throwing out Giovanni. That's also an option to play with here. The good thing is the basic EX Eevee has 90 HP, which lets it survive just a bit longer. And I actually like the 1-star version here. I mean, that looks pretty solid, pretty nice actually, to have such a good looking Leafeon there. But yeah, that's the first deck. Now, another variant is a mono water kind of evolution team. So we're playing here 2 copies of Glaceon EX, right? And we're also playing 2 copies of Vaporeon, right? The normal one. And this Vaporeon is able to move water energy attached from your bench Pokemon to one of your active Pokemon each round, right? As many times as you want to. So with Glaceon in the active position, we're going to be able to do damage each turn passively anyways. It requires free energy. Now, if we're not really lucky with Misty, we can still hold up a few rounds at least to be able to build up the required energy. The good thing is the opponent will continuously take damage, and this is even better than poisoning in my opinion, because from poisoning the opponent can heal himself. From Glaceon there is no way really of healing yourself, so you're only going to be able to just take the damage and heal maybe at a later stage, but you're not going to get rid of the damage unless you defeat Glaceon or force your opponent to switch it out, right? So that's actually the strategy here, bringing forth Glaceon as early as possible, having Vaporeon on the bench. Maybe by the time you're bringing out Glaceon, you already had water energy attached to one of your other Pokemons, maybe, right? And hence you're going to be able to play Vaporeon. Right? This is only hypothetical, this deck, right? Obviously, when a set drops, we will see what other cards are there and stuff. So this is going to get all adjusted. But as of now, this actually looks like an interesting combination as well. Right, another deck here, Sylveon EX. Now, this Pokemon is probably one of my favorites because essentially you're having another free Professor's Research in your deck, right? If you're able to play it, you're going to be able to draw another 2 cards. In this specific deck, this is probably one of my favorite decks as well. You're from every corner, you're already good, because Espeon only requires 1 energy. It does more damage the more energy is on your opponent's Pokemon. Giratina is able to self-supply himself with energy. Now, optionally, you could maybe drop out 1 Leafeon here and take in 1 Dawn, for example. Again, Sylveon is also not bad, doing a decent amount of damage. All of these Pokemon here, again, with the evolutions, you're going to be always set to bring them easily onto the field. You're hardly ever going to brick with these kind of decks, right? If anyone doesn't know how these decks work, just look at the real-life TCG, the big Pokemon TCG, and just check out some of the Prismatic Evolutions decks. Like, you're hardly ever going to brick with any of these decks because they are so consistent, because it allows you to play so many copies of the same Pokemon and essentially just fill up your field with whatever you require, right? So again, we're running Eevee back here. This is going to be particularly helpful when we want to heal the entire team, and also be able to do maybe a turn or so more damage, right? This can be very helpful situationally, right? The Eevee EX obviously is going to be able to survive a bit more than the normal Eevee since it has 90 HP. Additionally, you could maybe throw out Mars and throw in a Guzma, or even think about throwing a Red in there. That's also a viable option. But yeah, this is just another deck idea which I had. And this one is a big one. Flareon EX and Infernape EX. Now, this one is actually pretty busted, because now let's actually go over this. Again, Flareon is nice because it's able to, once a turn, take a fire energy from the discard pile and attach it to this Pokemon, right? If you do so, you do take 20 damage, but you gotta see the big picture here. Because Infernape, whenever it attacks, it will lose both its energies, right? However, Infernape does have a 0 retreat cost. So one way of playing this deck would be building up your Flareon on your bench. Also, letting your Infernape attack and then retreat it the turn after, bring forth your Flareon EX, deal damage, GG. However, an even smarter way of playing this would be with Dawn, right? So we do have Dawn here. Now, if you attack, for example, now with Infernape, right, doing 140 damage, then the next turn you're stuck with zero, energy, right? You're then going to be able to load up your Flareon with 1 energy, right? And then utilize Dawn to give that energy to Infernape, for example, and place obviously your normal energy also on Infernape. So you're going to be ready to attack again for 140. Now, the good thing about Infernape, it has a very high HP. 170 HP is a lot, so it's not going to be easily getting defeated by any random Pokemon, right? Now, the only thing here is obviously you're still requiring a rare candy, right? But this is one of those decks where I can actually see Flareon actually working very, very well, right? Obviously, we're running 1 copy of the Eevee bag as well. Now, I haven't really seen an appliance yet for the new Penny. I am still thinking on whether that card is as good as I think it is, but we're going to see once we're able to actually do some live testing. So, another deck, which isn't technically a new deck. It is rather an old deck, right? A already currently being used deck. However, I see this deck as very strong in the next season, because I do think that evolutions are going to make a huge portion of the new meta. That's why running something like Aerodactyl with the ability to prevent the opponent from evolving anything in his active position is going to be a big disruption, right? So just for Aerodactyl being on the field, you're going to be able to lock down your opponent in terms of evolutions, right? And then we're also running Silvally. Now, Silvally, I don't think it needs an introduction anymore. This Pokemon is already busted in his own rights. As a non-EX Pokemon, it is one of the best Pokemons in the game currently. And, I mean, you could even so play Rampardos and Silvally. That's also still viable. But again, this deck is one of those decks which I see very strong. Now, I've thrown in one of those pennies in there. I'm gonna have to see how that card actually translates in real life situations, because I don't really. Yeah, well, it could be like, for example, you're playing it, right? And the only card which you're able to copy from the opponent, for example, depending on what deck you're playing against, is, I don't know, Mars, right? And you may not want to use Mars at that moment, right? Or you're going to be able to use Cyrus, but the opponent doesn't have a Pokemon which has energy, which has lost energy from his bench. So it may run into nothing. So I don't know if that's going to work the way I'm thinking it. But yeah. And last but not least, we actually made a little meme kind of deck, but it is not really a meme deck. Now, this deck heavily reminds me on the Lake Trio deck, right? Where you had actually all three of those Pokemons which played a role together. Now, I actually see this deck as very useful now here. Now, two Pokemon here have the attack Sweet Relay. So this attack is interesting. If one of your Pokemon used Sweet Relay during your last turn, this attack does 20 more damage. So you're going to be able to do 30 damage. Since you have 4 Pokemon which use the same attack, you're bound to get one Pokemon which uses that attack each turn, most likely, right? Now, the good thing here is you have the Pokemon Alchemy, right? This one has the attack Sweets Overload, and this one's a big one. This attack does 40 damage for each time your Pokemons use Sweet Relay during this game. Now imagine you've used it 4 or 5 times. You're going to be able to do a lot of damage, right? 4 times, that's equivalent to 160 damage straight up. 5 times, that's 200 damage. You're going to be one-shotting anything in the entire game. I mean, this in itself for a non-EX Pokemon, and this attack only costs 1 energy, is huge, very huge. Now, obviously, it depends on whether you're going to be able to set up this strategy, right? But I do think this is going to be a viable strategy to play in the new season, right? I actually think this is going to be one of those decks which is going to be sort of a meme deck, but yeah. Giratina here is somewhat of a fallback. Now, I don't really know how useful Giratina is here, because you want to attack. You don't really want to hold off your attack. So giving Giratina energy and then attacking and then not attacking is not really the way, right? But I've thrown him in there because he's a fallback big damage dealer, right? Since your other Pokemon all require only 1 energy, you can just give him an energy, keep attacking, and also give your other energy to Giratina, and you're going to be set up for worst case scenario, right? This is actually, again, one of those decks which I see very strong. But yeah, those are actually all of the decks which I thought about for the new season. Do let me know down below in the comment sections what you think about these decks. I actually think some of them will probably be played the way shown here, or depending on what other cards are in the new set, maybe adjusted a little bit. But yeah, that's it from me. As always, thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. Until next time.